comes in at some point, then he'll come in. All right, so just quickly, the context here is the aftermath of the 12 spies.
Okay. Before you go on speaking about that, because that's not what you're speaking about now, right? This is after that.
Well, it's the denouement.
Okay. I learned something new just reading the commentary. I don't even remember the exact words that I learned in Hebrew school or even from one of your past discussions. But all of a sudden it dawned on me, the explanation that the commentary gave, that by sending out the spies at all was a mistrust in God's, in the fact that God had already given them good advice about being able, that things were safe. That's what the Chumash said.
Yeah?
Yeah.
All right.
That's
I
weird.
mean,
that's just a whole nother layer, right?
It would be odd because, because the parsha is called Shelach Lecha, which means you shall send.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And it starts with God commanding Moses to send spies. Now, I do see this. According to the tradition recorded in Deuteronomy, the initiative to scout the land originated with people, not God. That constituted a breach of faith because God, blah, 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 blah.
I didn't want you to think I made that up.
No, I wouldn't think you made it up. It's just, it's
weird.
Well, yeah, look, if we have learned anything these past 3 years, 4 years, it's that the text is multivocal.
Right.
Right. So,
the only reason I raised it was it just gave me a whole nother way of looking at it. I never really know, which way. I never really know whether the way I'm reading something or interpreting something is really what I'm supposed to be believing.
There is no supposed to be.
Okay.
Broadly speaking, and this is precisely why I raised the objection that I did. Broadly speaking, the text is multivocal, and there is nobody who is entitled to say, my interpretation is right and yours is wrong. With, to my mind, the exception of reading something that is clearly the opposite of the intention of the text. Right?
But okay, I had the exact same situation as I grew as a teacher, going away from the author's theme of this to really listening to the alternatives that the kids were, okay?
Yeah.
And sometimes you get this, if you're lucky, you don't show it, but you get this, oh God, there goes Charlie again, or oh God, there goes Dee again. And every once in a while, that kid that either wants to take you the wrong way or is just always off the wall really hits on something. And if you're open, you realize that it's not that it's wrong, and it's not even that it's opposite, it's just not something you ever thought of.
For sure.
So.
Right. Here you would have to, I think, to resolve the contradiction, simply say that, yes, God told Moses to send them, but it was in response to either an expressed or perceived lack of faith on the part of people.
That would do it for me.
All right.
Yep, that would do it for me.
All right. So now at this point, where we come in is that the spies have come back. They've said it's a good land, but the inhabitants are too powerful. We'll never be able to conquer them. And the people start
getting all upset.
Right? And that's where we come in.
Okay. One more thing. There was another interesting statement about the difference in perceptions between a people or a city or whatever that's walled. Excuse me. The different perceptions being, one is they are mighty and you don't want to mess with them, and the other is that they are frightened people who really can't.
That was my commentary.
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, I read it too.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Right. I mean, but that was my 2-minute Torah this week. It's from Rashi. It's not that I made it up.
Oh, no. Either way, what I'm saying is I also remember reading it. And I never thought of it that way either. But that's what the spies were. Was it that the spies were intimidated by the wall, or was it they were too lazy to go further to investigate?
No, they came back and they said, the inhabitants of the land are big and strong and powerful. How do we know this? Because their cities are well fortified.
Right.
And Rashi says, if you're strong, you don't need a wall.
Right.
Hear that, Donald?
I don't know that I buy that either, but okay, go ahead.
No, look, there's a difference between, and this is why when you have discussions about Israel, for example, it quickly breaks down, okay? Because, as you know, because we've discussed it a little bit, I'm probably more dovish than you, right? And yeah, I think I am. But at any rate, so I'll say something like, you know what, maybe the settlements aren't the best thing for Israel, and maybe Israel could do a little bit more to convince the Palestinians that there really is a possibility for a two-state solution if the Palestinians would, reciprocate and so on and so forth. Oh, so you're just saying disband the Israeli army and let them kill us all?
Who's saying?
That's
advocate. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm saying, no, I'm not saying that, right? But
You're saying try another avenue.
Right, but there's a difference between, and you get the same thing here. What if somebody says, well, maybe we really don't need to spend $30 billion on a wall, and then say, oh, so you're just saying, let everybody come in. No, I mean, there's a big difference between let everybody come in and turn America. Hey, Stan. Hey, Becky. Hi.
Just found it.
Okay, great. And Becky's there too. Hi, Becky.
Hi, Becky.
Well, let me see if I can unmute everybody. Oh, no, everybody's unmuted, I think. Are you? No, can't hear you.
I can hear you.
You can hear me. I can hear you.
Stanley hears Rabbi Arian.
Okay, yeah, I don't hear Becky either, but you're not there. The Becky, the problem is on your end. You're not muted. You're definitely not muted. All right. Well, we'll see. All right. So, there's a difference between, being a garrison state and being completely defenseless. So at any rate, so let's look at what we have here. So now the people are going nuts because they're scared, and Moses and Aaron are addressing, actually Joshua is addressing the people. Okay, and this section that we read tomorrow starts with verse 8. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will bring us into that land, a land that flows with milk and honey, and give it to us. Okay, that's not on your page here.
So Moses has already groomed him to take over. Okay.
Right. So now Joshua continues. Ach, Baranai al tim rodu va'atem al tir'u et am ha'aretz ki lachmenu hem sar tzila me'alehem Baranai itanu al. You shall not rebel against the Lord. Okay? And so Rashi says, and consequently, you shall not fear. Okay. So it says, you shall not rebel against the Lord, and you will not fear the people of that land. Right. And I guess Rashi's question here is, and it's a question that comes up, is that, so the first part of the verse is commanding action, right? Do not rebel. But the second part of the verse is do not fear.
You will not.
Well,
According to Rashi,
you will not fear. Exactly. But the question is, how can you command somebody to feel a certain emotion or to not feel a certain emotion? Right? I mean, it's one thing to say don't rebel because rebelling is an action. But don't fear, that's not an action, that's an emotion. Right? And I mean, I often I take into asking people this, right? Give me an example of a time when you said to somebody else, really don't be upset. And it worked. They stopped being upset because you told them not to be upset, right? It doesn't work. In fact, usually makes it worse, right? So if you say don't be afraid, it doesn't work. And usually they become more afraid, right? So what Rashi is saying, Joshua is saying, don't rebel. And if you don't rebel, you won't be afraid. Right? The not being afraid is not a separate commandment. The don't be afraid is a consequence of obeying the commandment not to rebel.
Right.
Okay? And, as my mentor, Father Walsh, once said to me, every commandment is also a promise. If you read it, you shall not. We usually read it, right? Meaning promise. You shall not. You shall not be afraid.
Okay, but who's making the promise?
God.
All right, I'm confused. Supposing that the commandment is honor thy father and thy mother. If you do that, I will bless you.
Well, no, the promise is that you will honor your mother and your father. In other words, you have. It depends on how. Yeah, it depends on how you read the Hebrew. Okay. Instead of reading it as honor your father and your mother. Remember, Hebrew and English don't, right?
That's God's commandment.
Read it as you will honor your father and your mother, which is both a commandment and a promise. All right, I don't want to get bogged down here. Right. If you don't
I don't, but okay.
Understand it. When God is saying you shall honor your mother, that's not just a commandment, it's a statement. You shall honor your mother. You will do it. Because God never commands us to do the impossible.
I got God's part.
Right.
I don't see where it's my promise.
No, it's not your promise. It's God's promise to you.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It's God's promise
He's promising something for you.
Right. He's promising something for you, right? He's promising that you will be able to accomplish this thing. Okay. For they are our bread. Right? What does that mean? Right? Obviously, they're not literally our bread, right? I mean, the Torah forbids cannibalism, right? We will consume them as if they were bread. Okay? Kisartilam, their protection, their shade, their shield is taken away from them. Their shield and strength. Their virtuous ones have died, namely Job, who protected them. I don't want to get bogged down on this, but Job was not a Jew, okay? And Job was a Gentile, and according to this Rashi, basing himself on the Talmud, at this point, Job has died, and just like the merit of righteous Jews protects Israel, the merit of righteous Gentiles protects the Gentile nations. All right, so their strength has been taken away from them. And anyway, so now let's go to verse 12. And now God is speaking to Moses. Okay, we'll look at 11 and 12. The Lord said to Moses, how long will this people spurn me, and how long will they have no faith in me despite all the signs that I've performed in their midst? I will strike them with pestilence and disown them, and I will make of you a nation far more numerous than they. Okay, so God is saying to Moses, you know what? I am tired of these Jews. Okay, they drive you crazy. They drive me crazy. How about if I just kill them all and we'll start a new nation only descended from you? Right, and that way you won't have to deal with all these crazy, kvetchy, whining Jews. Right, and so that's what God is saying. All right, Ve'orishenu, I will strike them with the plague. But the word orishenu, right? If you know Hebrew and you look at it, right, it's clearly the strength, the meaning of this word is I will destroy them. But the Hebrew root is yarash, which means to inherit, right? Like morashah, Yerusha is an inheritance. Morashah is a heritage, right? So what does it mean to say orishenu? I will, you could read it as I will cause them to inherit, or I will cause you to inherit. So Rashi is putting words in Moses' mouth. The intomar ma aseh l'shvuat avot. So Rashi is putting words in Moses' mouth. Moses is saying to God, you can't kill them all and start all over just with me, because what happens to the promise that you've made, right? God made a promise to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, right, to the patriarchs, that your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky. So how are you right? In other words, and the tradition relies on that, right? That God has promised that the Jewish people will never be completely annihilated, right? And even after the Holocaust, we weren't completely annihilated. And here God wants to completely annihilate them. And Moses says, oh, you can't do that because you'd be forfeiting your own promise. You'd be forfeiting your own promise. And then God comes back and says, Va'aseh otcha l'goy gadol she'atem mizaram. I will make you into a great nation, for you are descended from them. In other words, God is saying to Moses, you get what he's saying? He's saying, Moses is saying, you can't destroy them and start all over just with me, because you made a promise to the patriarchs that you wouldn't, that they would have innumerable descendants. And God says back to Moses, yeah, I can, because who are you descended? No, not because God is bound by his own promises.
Right.
But God is saying, if I start all over with you, I haven't broken my promise. Because who are you descended from, Moses? You're descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Right? And so if you are descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, then if I start all over again with a nation that is just your descendants, I haven't broken the promise. Right? You get what he's saying? Becky, you have a puzzled look.
Okay. Yeah, I hear you.
I'm just thinking.
Okay. All right. Right. So that's what God is saying. I can do that.
He thinks Moses is going to be that prolific.
Well, but the point
I got
is,
the
right?
point.
The point is that even God is bound, right? God is not above the law. God makes a promise, and once God makes a promise, God is bound by it too. Okay? There is no executive privilege, no saying, oh, well, the Second Amendment gives God the right to do whatever he wants, and nobody can challenge him. Okay. So what's Moses' comeback? Moses said to the Lord, but the Egyptians will hear that you have brought this nation out from its midst with great power. Right. Well, we know that they already heard that. They already know that. V'shamum, they will hear that you killed them. All right. And then they will say, it's better to look at the second one, right? This key is used in the sense of a share. Okay. V'shamu Mitzrayim ki ha'eleta. That, in other words, Rashi is saying that if you kill all the Israelites, the Egyptians will say, wait a second, God was able to bring them out of Egypt, but he wasn't able to bring them into the land, right? In other words, it's a two-part thing. It's leave Egypt, go to the land, right? And in other words, Moses is very concerned for God's reputation. It says, God, if you do this, God, it's fascinating. If you consider it seriously, I was kind of being flippant about even God is bound by God's promises, right? But if you consider it in the context of certain events and certain individuals, you may think that this is a show of strength, but it's actually a show of weakness.
On whose part?
God. Because
on the action that he wants to take.
Right,
but
because
it's
if you...
very courageous stand on the part of Moses.
Very courageous
Right.
stand on the part of
Right.
Moses.
But this is almost like, remember from The King and I, the song game, and there's a line that if you become a teacher by your pupils,
You'll be taught.
That's the situation.
Sure, absolutely. Right, and we have this, the Talmud is full of it.
That's humbling, if
Yeah.
you can humble God.
Sure. But that's exactly what he's doing. He's saying, if you... I'll just sort of summarize this because there's a hockey game and there's a lot of good stuff here, right? But basically, Moses is saying that and we go back to this idea that I've discussed before, which is called henotheism. Okay, meaning that there are many gods, but we only worship one, but the others exist. Okay, and each god is the god either of a specific territory or a specific nation. Right? People. Right. And so Pharaoh thinks that he is the god of Egypt. Right? And so now the God of Israel has defeated the God of Egypt. Right? And that's why we were able to leave Israel, because our God has defeated Pharaoh. But that's one-to-one. Right? There are innumerable nations in Canaan, innumerable city-states in Canaan. So there's not one God of Canaan. There's many, many gods, right? There's the God of the Hittites. There's the God of the Amorites, the gods of the Jebusites, the God of Beersheba, the God of Dan, the God of, this place, that place, the other. It's too many gods, right? Hashem is strong enough to defeat Pharaoh, but Hashem is not strong enough to defeat all of the innumerable gods of Canaan. And that's why you had to kill the people, because you're not strong enough to defeat the gods of Canaan.
I got it. Okay.
Right. In other words, Moses is saying that's what people will say. That's what people will say. People will say, oh, God wasn't strong enough to conquer the gods of Canaan, and that's why he had to kill all the Israelites in the desert. He was strong enough to bring them out of Egypt, but he couldn't finish the job. Right? He couldn't finish the job.
And this is Moses.
This is Moses's argument to save his people, right? So if you look at verse 16, okay? This is what 15 and 16, all right? 15, if you kill this nation like one man, right, suddenly the nations who have heard of your reputation will say as follows: since the Lord lacked the ability to bring this nation to the land which he swore to them, he slaughtered them in the desert. Okay, since the Lord lacked the ability. Look at Rashi. The inhabitants of the land are strong and powerful. Pharaoh cannot be compared to 31 kings. Right, so there's 31 kings in the land of Canaan. They will say this about the inhabitants of this land: since the Lord is incapable, because he did not have the ability to bring them, he slaughtered them. Okay, so now please let the strength of the Lord be increased as you spoke, saying, meaning implement your word, right? You made a promise. And you need to keep your promise, right? Because otherwise, God, you're going to look bad all around. You're going to look weak, and you're going to look as if you're a God who doesn't keep his promises. Right?
Yep. It's very clear.
It's very, very clear, and the chutzpah of Moses, right, to speak to God this way is pretty incredible. But that's what he's doing, right? He's saying, he's like.
But the irony isn't that God may not have been expecting this, but since he's omniscient, isn't that indicative of all of the traits that Moses had, which made him select Moses in the first place?
Sure. Right? But so, it's very interesting. I find this whole, and this is, and sometimes Rashi is reading stuff into the text that arguably is not in the plain text. Here, this is the plain text, right? And Moses is like, he's acting like a campaign consultant, right? If you do this, then people will think this, and it won't look so good, right? So don't do it, right? You'll get people will think you're weak. People will think you don't keep promises, right? And now it's interesting. You get what I'm saying here?
I get it.
Why doesn't God say, so what? What do I care what people think about me? Anyone? Bueller?
Well, this is a stretch, but nobody really knows God. But you have to think that God is an ethical. God maintains his own set of ethics as if he wishes mankind to have.
Yeah, but
that may be an oversimplification.
No. I think it's true, but that's not the main thrust of Moses' argument, right? Moses isn't saying don't do this because it's wrong.
Well, then it's obvious that he's doing this because he wants to save his people.
Right, but the point is, I'm not interested in Moses' motivation. I'm interested in God's response or lack thereof. In other words, Moses isn't saying we know why Moses is doing it. That's not the question. The question is, what exactly is Moses' strategy here? Right? And Moses isn't saying to God, don't do this because it's wrong. He's saying, don't do this because it will look bad. It's not the same
I
thing.
agree.
It's not the same thing. I mean, I'll tell a little story on myself, right? Years ago when we were still in Connecticut, a friend of mine he's retired, but he was a minister in Richmond. And he sent me an email saying, I want you to come down. You and Kelly come down. We'll pay your expenses and pay you an honorarium. Do a model Seder in my church. And I said to him, Brooke, it's a problem because I published a couple years ago a major article about why churches shouldn't have Seders. And now I'll look like a hypocrite, right? I said, now, mind you, Brooke, because we're close friends, I could say this to him. Mind you, Brooke, I don't mind being a hypocrite, but I don't want to look like a hypocrite, right? And that's what, it's essentially the same strategy that Moses is employing, right? He said, you'll look bad. He's not saying don't do it because it's wrong. He's saying you'll look bad. You'll look, but what will people think? I mean, when I hear it, I almost hear like Moses saying, not what will people think, but, oy, what will people think if you do this thing? You know, what will the goyim say? I mean, but it works. It works, right? And that's, to me, what's really amazing, right? That it's not a moral appeal. It's a very practical, very pragmatic appeal. And God, who is all-powerful and presumably beyond caring about what people think about him, he concedes. He buys the argument. Right? I don't know. So
What do you think about that?
what do I think about that?
Yeah,
Um,
this humanized form of the Supreme Almighty who cares what other people think. Supposedly all powerful, but now, just like humans, caring that reputation is everything and reputation is where you get your power from because you don't have power unless everyone else thinks you do.
right. Look, I think that the God of the Bible is not the God of the philosophers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we always read the text through later spectacles, so to speak, right? So that when God acts in ways that seem excessively anthropomorphic or morally questionable, it bothers us in a way that it presumably did not bother the original authors. Having said that, I can construct an argument that accounts for the plain meaning of the text and still satisfies the objection that you've raised, which is to say that God essentially says to Moses, yes, kol hakavod, bully for you, right? You have stood up to defend your people. I expect nothing less from you. And therefore, I'm going to, like it says in verse 20, salachti kidvarecha, right? In accordance with your word, right? You asked, and so that's what I'm going to do. Right? And it's interesting, if you look at verse 20, Vayomer Adonai salachti kidvarecha, right? That appears right after the Kol Nidre.
I was going to say this.
Right? Right? Vayomer Adonai salachti kidvarecha vayom. You should sing this. I don't know if you learned it yet, but right. But that's it's one of the classics of cantorial art, right? God says, "I have forgiven according to your word." But then Rashi kind of undoes it. What word? This word. Oh, they'll say that you're lacking in power, and that's why you couldn't bring me into the. So I want to skip ahead because.
But in the end, I know this isn't where you're going, but in the end, because he marched them through the desert for so long till they actually died off. He accomplished the same thing. Not in the same manner.
Not in the same manner and not in the same length of time. Right? I mean, there's a difference between killing them off now and killing off everybody but Moses.
I understand, but the
versus,
outcome is the same.
Right, but people die. I mean, not to be flippant, right? But you might as well say about a medical intervention, well, what was the point? They died anyway. Yeah, they died anyway, but they died in 10 years instead of in 3 months, right? Everybody dies.
Yeah, but I'm somewhere else. The end result is it's another generation that doesn't have all the baggage that the people that he has the issue with had.
Right.
So it's essentially virgin as compared to the people that he was originally.
For sure.
That's all I'm saying.
For sure. And I mean, the way I read this, because I believe that the God of the Torah learns, right? And he
does a good teacher.
And he makes mistakes, and he says, I thought I could, but I can't, right? In other words, I spoke about this. I actually spoke about this last Shabbat, the difference between a technical challenge and an adaptive challenge, right? That God thought the problem is that the people are slaves. So I will bring them out of Egypt and bring them to the promised land, and they won't be slaves anymore. That's a technical problem. The problem is not merely that they're slaves. The problem is that they have a slave mentality.
So it came with them.
Right? They left Egypt, but they brought Egypt with them. Right? And that's much harder. But there's a difference between saying, y'all are not ready, so you're going to have to spend 40 years in the desert till you're ready, versus I'm going to kill everybody.
That I understand, but I'm saying in the end.
Right. That generation did not get to the promised land. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead, and then we're going to watch hockey. All right.
It's being taped.
Oh my gosh.
What?
It's being taped.
Okay. But we're going to watch hockey. That's both a commandment and a promise. Thou shalt watch hockey.
Even if you hate it.
Right. No, you have to. Right. I mean, the problem is, I like hockey, but between the fights, they're chasing the puck around, and that's kind of boring, but the fights are fun. Right. So, verse 27. Ad matai la'edah hara'ah hazot asher hema malinin alai et tlunot b'nei Yisrael asher hema malinim alai shamati. How much longer will this evil congregation who are causing to complain against me exist? Right? How long do I have to put up with these fetchy Jews? The complaints of the children of Israel, which they have caused them to complain against me, I have heard. I've heard their complaints. Shut up. All right. Now, this is the verse from which we derive the law that a minion is 10. Okay? I don't know if you knew that. Anybody, did you know that?
You told us last year.
I did. I taught it last year. What? What did you say,
Yes.
Beck?
What?
What did you say? Did you say repeat?
I didn't say anything.
Oh, okay.
No.
All right.
I got it.
Okay. So, this is the verse from which we derive the law that a minion is 10. How? La'edah hara'ah, this evil congregation, Elu hamiraglim, this refers to the spies, Mikan la'edah shehi asara. And that's how we know that a congregation numbers a minimum of 10. Right? Now, Rashi is skipping a lot of steps here. Right? He's skipping a lot of steps here, but the point is that if you look in the Torah, okay, and of course they didn't have, do you know what a concordance is? I mean, we almost don't even use them anymore because now we have computers, we have Google or whatever. But a concordance is a book that tells you where a particular word appears in the Bible every time it appears.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that's called a concordance.
Okay.
Okay, or in Hebrew, a concordancia.
Hebrew? I don't
Yeah,
think so.
concordancia.
Oh, God.
So if you look at the word Edah, which means congregation, and you look at it in context every time it appears, you will never find a smaller group than the 12 spies to which the word Edah is applied. Okay, so consequently, we know that an Edah is at least 12 people.
And why 10 for me?
And why 10? Because God said evil congregation. Caleb and Joshua were not evil.
Ah.
So you have a group of 12, but then God says, oh, these evil people. Well, take out Caleb and Joshua, gets you down to 10. And that's how we know that the smallest group that can be called a congregation is 10.
But in essence, it's attached to evil.
It's attached to evil, right?
So that's an oxymoron.
No, it's not, because you know, there's a Yiddish saying, all right, 9 rabbis don't make a minyan, but 10 horse thieves do. Right? It's not a matter of virtue.
It's a matter of number?
It's a matter
Period.
of number.
So it's arbitrary.
Period. No, it's not arbitrary.
Well, I mean, it's not arbitrary by how many there were, but so if there were 15, then it would be 15.
Right, but there were 10.
I got it.
I mean, but the point is that to be part of the congregation, you don't have to be good. All you have to do is be there. Right? And it's like, and I mean, look, I think the fact that this requirement of a minyan is derived from bad people is very profound. Right? Because people say, oh, I don't want to go to that congregation. It's full of terrible, hypocritical people. Well, so fine. Say, I don't want to go to the hospital. It's full of sick people. Right? I mean, that's what it's for. Right? That's what it's for. If we were perfect, we wouldn't need a shul. Right? Precisely because we're not perfect, that's why we need a shul. Right? But yeah, so we know that the smallest group that is referred to as a congregation, that the word Edah is 10. Okay? And now you may say, what is this word Edah? But it's actually quite common, particularly in the names of synagogues. Right? Addis Israel. Right? Adat Shalom. Addis Jeshurun, right? Any different ways of transliterating it, but any congregation that's Addis, Adat, Addis, the word Edah, okay, which means congregation, literally means flock.
Okay.
Like flock.
Okay.
So Addis Israel, the congregation of Israel, the flock of Israel. Okay. So last verse. 15:2. Speak to the children of Israel, Daber el bnei Israel, v'amarta alehem, say to them, Ki tavo'u el eretz moshvotechem, asher ani noten lachem. Let's look at the full context. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, and then it's sacrificial laws. Okay, so, but, look at the Rashi. Ki tavo'u, when you arrive, Basar lahem sheyikansu la'aretz. He promised them, he informed them that they would enter the land.
I was going to say, because as literally written there, the thought is not finished. But the only thing that's important in there is that they're going to get there.
Right, right. I mean, the way verses split up, they don't always make full sentences. right? But that's not the point. And then it goes into all kinds of laws about sacrifice and agriculture, but that's not the point. Right? The people are now afraid, right? Because God is really mad at them. And he said, they're saying, well, maybe we won't get to the promised land at all. Maybe God is so mad, right? It's kind of like, I imagine, like, here's the scenario I have in my mind, okay? The family is supposed to take a trip to Florida, right? And the week before they're supposed to go to Florida, the kids have bought firecrackers, and they've lit off firecrackers in the backyard, and they accidentally set a brush fire.
And now they're not going to Florida.
They're afraid they're not going to go to Florida, right? Because now mom and dad are really mad, and they're punishing them. And then, mom and dad, so after they've, talked about the punishment, and you're not going to blah, 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 blah. And when we get to Florida, you're not getting ice cream. The kids would be very happy, right? Because, I thought, like, we're going to not go to Florida. Yes, we're going to go. We're punished, but we're still going to Florida. But we're not going to get ice cream. Okay, I can live with that.
So therefore we can do it again.
Right. And a couple of weeks ago, right, when I said this week's Parsha is the one where the Jews complain, and everybody cracked up, right? Because every Parsha is the one where the Jews complain, right? Because that's what we do. That's what we're good at, right? But the point is that God is mad at them, but he's not so mad that they're not going to get to the land. That's the point. All right?
Yep.
Good?
That's your cover.
Questions, comments, rebuttals?
I mean, yes, but I'll ask you later since you want to watch the hockey game.
No. Oh, okay. All right. Send me a message and we'll talk. All right?
Okay.
All right. Thank
Bye,
you.
Madeline.
Bye-bye. Bye, Stan. Huh?
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.